Welcome to another episode of Interfaiths, our podcast for the course here at Florida International University. I'm here with Jason, who's going to talk a little bit about himself, where he grew up, and a little bit about his background. And we'll get into his time here as a student and some of the work that we're doing together for our interfaith dialogue. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason and talk to us a little bit about who you are.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Sure.
I grew up in Porto, Portugal. It's the second biggest town in the country in the north. I would say I was basically the only Jewish person my age at the time, growing up at that period of time in Porto. It's a unique situation because I'm not really all that religious, or didn't grow up all that religious, but my parents felt a need to do something with the community. The kind of it's a very old community,
Right.
but it was kind of dwindling, dying.
Sure.
And so, they felt they had to do something, and they did. And my dad eventually became president. And this was, of course, before I was born that they began participating. But of course, I had a bar mitzvah. I went there frequently for all the high holidays. But it's the transfer from Porto to Miami, and the shift from like a place that has zero Jews to a place that has all Jews in places like 41st Street, where you'll literally see, Hebrew building signs, right? That's a shift that's very bizarre and hard to describe. But I would say that that's, the unique part of this.
Okay. Talk to us about, so what was your first experiences with Judaism?
My first, that I can remember?
Yeah, that you can remember, yeah.
Well, I remember being very little and being at the sukkah on the terrace of the synagogue.
Okay.
And they made like a whole table out there. And the rabbi, because I was very interested at the time, right, and what the rabbi was doing, the whole thing, he said, you're going to be a little rabbi. And for some reason at the time, that completely turned me off. I'm like, oh my God, the hell did he? Why is he telling me this? Why is he trying to, turn me into him? I was like, okay. So I just remember as a little kid finding that very bizarre that he was, so interested. I didn't really realize the fact that there was, that he felt a need to try and get the younger generation into it, right? That I was, he felt that hope. I was this hope, right? Yeah, exactly. This glimmer of hope for the community. But at the time, I almost felt rebellious. I'm like, oh, now that he's telling me, I don't like it anymore. It's like when, you enjoy a subject and suddenly it's like you're learning in school. It's like, I don't like that anymore. Right. But it took me a few years of growing up and experience in life to understand, obviously, I was a bit silly as a kid, and the intentions were definitely pure there on his part.
So growing up in a place where there were very few Jews, what was your sense of community like there?
Very strong bond, of course. This was the only little Jewish sphere that existed, right? So the funny thing is my parents would drive, right? Because we live very far away. We live like 30 minutes outside of Porto, so we'd have to drive into the city, and we would park down the block so they wouldn't see that we were driving. It's like, oh yes, of course, we're walking, Right. Of course they would see our car. They knew we were driving. We just wanted to play the game.
Sure.
But the sense of community was very strong. We had a huge respect for each other. There was for all the high holidays. Everybody knows each other, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not like there's here, if you go to the Chabad in Midtown, right? You'll see that there's, I love the Chabad Midtown, but there's a lot of people, right? People come and go. It's a bigger place, right? So on the high holidays, it's full. You'll see people you've never seen before. Right. And I love that too. There's an element to that, that you always meet new people that you can connect to. But in the community at home, at the Porto Jewish community, these are people that I've known since I was this tall, since I was a little kid, right? Since I was a toddler, literally. So the sense of community there, of course, is very strong. These people are like family. Yeah. Of course, that doesn't mean that there weren't, obviously issues, especially when it became political, in the sense that there was an immigration thing. There was I'm sure it's been public. A lot of people have heard about it, about how if you can prove Sephardic Jewish lineage from Portugal, from before from the period of the Inquisition, then you can get citizenship. And that's what, of course, a lot of people managed to do. Jews, fled the Ottoman Empire, North Africa. they managed to gain Portuguese citizenship through this program. There were two rival programs.
Right,
There was
the
one in
Spanish as
Lisbon.
well.
And,
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
well, the Spanish one, of course,
The
but
Spanish
within
one.
Portugal,
Oh,
there's one
okay,
through
okay.
Lisbon and one through Porto, and they're
Okay.
slightly different systems.
Okay.
But there was a bit of a rivalry
Uh-huh.
between the communities, right?
Got it.
So, that's not unusual.
Right.
But other than that, of course, there's, huge sense of community.
Okay. All right. Well, wonderful. And so then you go from there to coming here and living in Miami. How has that changed in terms of your Jewish identity?
One would think that being in a place where there are no Jews makes you feel like you stand out more as being Jewish, right? But that isn't really the case. There's almost like an incentive to hide it, to like kind of not, you don't really feel that identity. You kind of want to keep it away, from the public sphere.
Right.
But then when you're here, you don't really have that same feeling because there's so many Jews. It's like, okay, well, what does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to, culturally, openly to be Jewish? So I would say I became much more connected to my Jewish. I mean, I also grew up. That's the other thing, because I came at 11. So
Sure.
I don't know how much of that is just because of the exposure to that,
Right.
or if it's just because of me, growing up and finding my way in life. But definitely the presence of a Jewish community here makes it easier to be able to associate with it, right? To feel, you can wear a Magen David or a kippah and walk on the street and not feel like, oh, I'm culturally out of place, right, in this spot. In Portugal, of course, it's a very welcoming country, but it is a very Catholic country, and people aren't used to it, so they see that and it's like, that's odd. Maybe it's a tourist or something. They don't make that connection that there can be people that are Jewish that are Portuguese.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would say that was the big shift, was feeling more open. I would say I went voluntarily to these things, to a lot of Jewish events, without my parents. Obviously, my parents would go when I was in high school. I would go to stuff. But again, I don't know what part of that is just exposure to that, or if it's just growing up here, right? Because I came here at 11.
Exactly.
And of course I wouldn't have done that if I was a kid. Not that there were any available,
Right,
because there were no youth Jewish events. There may be now. Now that there is a larger Jewish community in my town. But
so what about being here at FIU? How has your experience been?
Oh, amazing. I mean, there's a very large Jewish community here, a huge presence. I would say that people are very, very welcoming. All religious communities overall, there's no problems. People are super friendly with each other. I mean, obviously there's some issues like there's anywhere, but I think FIU is among the best, really. So, I mean, yeah, I only have positive things to say. I did stuff with Chabad, with Hillel, all sorts of Jewish organizations when I was still here. I try to still come when I can, try to participate in their events. I help sometimes organize stuff here and there. But other than that, I really just come for the social side of it.
Okay.
Because I think that there's something that's unique and not replaceable to, sitting around a Shabbat table.
Of course.
And I think here you have that kind of environment where there is a community here too that I recognize, that I know, that I went to school with for the past 4 years. So again, it's a similar situation where it's that sense of community that's unique that I've built here, right, in my time in university. But yeah, only positive things to say about FIU in that regard.
Great. One of the things that's been a challenge, I think, after October 7th is like thinking about the challenge of anti-Semitism more generally. What has been your experience either in Porto or here in Miami with anti-Semitism?
I think a lot of people attribute a lot of the world's problems to Jews. I think that there's an anti-Semitism is very different from other forms of racism, and the other forms of racism tend to paint people as inferior or being worse in some way. And frequently people will say, why is this particular comment anti-Semitic? Why is this anti-Semitic? You're saying Jews have a very high IQ, and Jews, they control all the banks, or they do all the, and it's like, why is that bad? It's like, well, it's proven to be bad because the message that you're controlling everything means you're also to blame for everything. And that's frequently the kind of anti-Semitism I've seen, right, from a lot of people. And that's not unique to the US or to Portugal. It's just a historical thing, right? That's an ancient form of anti-Semitism. And I've seen it, in all forms. I see people that are on the far right that are, neo-Nazis that believe, a lot of these things about Jews. But the newest form is I see it on the far left as well, right? A lot of people that may, at some point have good intentions with, be advocacy for Palestinian rights, etc. But then they convert that into a hatred against Jewish people, right? Or against Israelis too, right? If you look at any sort of discrimination policy or hate policy or racism policy, it says race, right? Ethnicity, religion, nationality. These are all issues, right? And, you see all of it, right? Increasing. Like in the US, I think Jews are the highest victim of hate crimes, right? Statistically. But it's kind of presented, I think, almost on like the new left form of anti-Semitism as if, well, all Jews are white. They're no different from like white Anglo-Saxons. So there isn't really like a problem. They kind of try to define it out of existence almost. Sure. And so, that's the way I've seen it politically, is in these various forms. And you just see it ramping up. Now, in my personal experience, I've really only had experiences talking to people that are, extreme. Thankfully, they've never attacked me or done things to me physically. But I've had conversations with crazy people that, say all these things. And to, harassment to an extent with, we had a Shabbat event. And, we had some people come speak that were former IDF soldiers. And the protest was unbelievable, right? They organized the whole thing. They, surrounded the room, were like banging on the doors, saying everybody's like genocidal, baby killer, murderer, all these things, right?
Here at FIU?
Yeah, here at FIU, saying all these things, and they tried to break in, of course. They were like banging on the doors. It was, it literally changed the rules on protesting in the Graham Center because of the degree of aggression of this protest. And of course, we had to, we recorded this. Some of these clips went viral, right? There was people following kids to their cars, right? It was a kid who was 8 years old with his mother that was followed, and people did Nazi salutes. And it's all on camera. I mean, it went viral. Yeah. But I think there's been an effort to try and curb that. And I think even a lot of the students that may have participated in that later probably saw, what it, looking back, okay, what was I doing there? Right. At least I hope.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing that happens with the kind of the scale of brainwashing when it comes to, how people think about minorities. I mean, it's not just Jews, but this is just my experience with it, right?
One of the other things that's been, a big thing, I think, after October 7th is the U.S. relationship with Israel. Talk to us a little bit about your understanding of Israel and kind of your relationship with it.
Well, I think Israel, obviously, it has a importance for a lot of Jews in that, Jews were persecuted everywhere for thousands of years. And when it comes to Europe, when it comes to the Middle East, when it comes to really anywhere, there hasn't really been a place that's been a consistent home for the Jews, right? In the sense of a lot of people, they feel Jews kind of should have a sense of self-determination. They have a unique culture. They have a unique, connection to each other and to, Jerusalem. They, pray in the direction of Jerusalem. There's a whole culture around that. Now, I'm not super religious. I don't live in Israel. I'm not Israeli. So obviously I can't speak to what that's like or to the degree. But of course, Israel is important to me in the sense that, I don't know what happens. I don't know what the solution is, right? I don't know. I think everybody should be able to live there equally. But the fact is, the Jews have a right to live there, right? Jews should have some degree of self-determination. And whether that's important in your religion or that's important for your own safety or that's important for your identity, whatever way that's defined, I think that there is an importance to that, right? When it comes to the political side and to the conflict side, I have no idea how that ends. I have no idea, right? What a two-state solution would look like, I have no idea, right? But the fact is, obviously, the Jewish side, Jewish self-determination is important. Right. And of course, you can't, a lot of people try to separate elements of that from Judaism, right? The fact that there is, praying in the direction of Jerusalem, there's, infinite talk about, Kingdom of Israel or the location of Zion or all these things, right? These things are talked about a lot in the Torah. Yeah. And of course, I saw there was attempts to try and remove that or to try and separate it a little bit. There's groups that people always point to, like Natudei Karta, which is a very extreme, anti-Zionist group. And by the way, not all anti-Zionist Jews think like Natudei Karta. A lot of them just don't think it's time, or they have different ways of rationalizing. But Natudei Karta, they side with Iran. They side with a lot of radical regimes. there are 3,000 people. This is a very
Right.
small percentage of
course, yeah.
Jews, right? But they're presented as if this is a large population, right? They go to a lot of protests. They're very vocal. So it's like, okay, well, these are the good Jews, right?
Mhm.
I only agree with the good Jews, not the bad Jews. They're like the 90% that are Zionists. Those are the bad Jews. And there's this kind of like dichotomy that's drawn, which is like, okay, well, if you mean Zionist as in like radical, wants to kill people, then okay, then that's bad, you know, but that's not what it means, right? So people can try to redefine things to try and, you know, incriminate a group of people. And that doesn't mean that there aren't radical people. There's horrible radical people, right? Like, I don't like Netanyahu. I don't like a lot of people that are on, you know, to the far right of me. But that doesn't mean that you can just label everybody that's, you know, that believes in there being a state of Israel at all, which is what Zionism means, as being somehow malicious, right? But that is kind of the direction I think it's going, which is very disturbing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's what I can say, right?
Okay. No, that's great. What is something that drew you to interfaith dialogue, and what is something that's important? How do you see other religious traditions?
Well, I always had an interest from the time I was little. I mean, like I said, I grew up in a Catholic country, so frequently I would see a lot of the things that my friends and their families would do. You know, sometimes on Sunday I would go with them to church, and I'd see the whole, and it was fascinating, right? Seeing all these angles to tradition and to how people live their lives, right? To humanity. It's beautiful. Now, when I came to the U.S., I saw even more of that, right? You have Protestants and Catholics and Orthodox, all these different types. And then you have, you know, various kinds of Muslims, and you have various kinds of, you know, Jews, different levels of practice. And you have such diversity here religiously, right? That it increased my interest, right? Initially, funnily enough, I did chemistry, believe it or not. I mean, who would have thought? I did, you know, science, right? Raw science, the central science. Right. But eventually I pivoted toward political science as I became more interested in that field. And one of the things I did was for a certificate in the Middle East, I actually traveled to the region, right? To Israel, Palestinian territories, Jordan, and to get the certificate. And the group that I went with was the Christian Ecumenical Foundation, a Christian group.
Okay.
But it was with the Muslim Study Center, or the Jaffer Center, for Muslim World Studies. And I went with another Jewish friend. Okay. Most of the group, of course, wasn't, but one other Jewish friend. So it was quite interesting going in a Christian group led by Muslims as a Jew with another Jew. It's just that experience in and of itself was kind of blending these cultures, right? We got to see churches, synagogues, mosques. We got to see every angle, right? Stay 2 weeks in Ramallah and have that experience. And I think that was extremely valuable, and that increased my interest even more, right? In trying to understand these cultures, trying to see where our points in common are. And then when October 7th happened, it feels like so much work that people have been doing to try and bring people together was just undone like that, right? Immediately. You have a Cold War immediately between people that were friends a day ago, right? I know people that went to a protest on October 8th saying victory Palestine, right? As footage was still coming out of people getting, slaughtered. So obviously that's a difficult thing to get over. I've tried to resolve that gap, but of course that's very difficult, right? But yeah, I think that mending that wound is, I think, something that everybody should be trying to do, right? That every Jew and every Muslim, or to whoever at least has the resources and the knowledge and the contacts, I guess, to be able to mend that gap. They should. I think we have a responsibility to do that. And, I don't think anybody should wait for somebody else to do it for them, right? This is, we are in this, especially as Jews. I mean, Muslims, of course, but Jews, we are only 15 million people. I mean, there aren't many Jews. I mean, there's 2 billion Muslims. I don't think every Muslim knows a Jewish person, but at least with Jews, we have a duty to kind of try and be ambassadors. And I feel like not enough people have tried to do that. People do, but it's quite small. And obviously I can't speak to Muslim ambassadors, right? But of course, there has to be an effort too. I think everybody needs to try and come together. And I think that's where interfaith comes in, is our religions are more similar than they are different. Absolutely. So I think that there is a lot of room that, to come together and see, okay, well, maybe our issues are a little bit silly, Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the thing ultimately. One of the things that I hope that we're getting out of the connections are just kind of like the lived realities of how similar our religious traditions are, and then also navigating our kind of spiritual paths in the United States. And there's a lot of overlap and a lot of similarity. And I think that ultimately, these beliefs of, one of the things I really enjoy about the Quran and the Talmud as well, there's this tradition that if you have saved one life, you've saved all of humanity, and if you've killed one person, you've killed all of humanity. I think it's very powerful when you really think about it. And just part of what we're trying to do, I think, with our work is to try to see the full humanity in the other, and being able to really deeply listen and to embrace the other. And I think ultimately, like, nobody wants to hate and to destroy the other. And I think even in the Palestinian-Israeli sort of situation, there are some extremists on both sides. And I think those voices, unfortunately, have taken sort of center stage, and they're kind of leading the action. Whereas I think the vast majority of people are, want to live their lives peacefully, and they want to have, economic prosperity, and they want to be able to provide for their families and sort of live in peace. And so how do we, in a way, kind of embolden, the majority who have that perspective, So it's a very
That's the goal.
Yeah, that's a goal. Yeah, it's a very important distinction. Well, thank you so much for coming
Thank
in.
you.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
It was a
Thank you
pleasure.
for being part of our dialogue.
It's an honor to be
group.
part of it.
Yeah, thank you so much.